From the start, our team has been fascinated by these flocks of birds and their ability to perform beautiful, complex patterns in the sky using simple, local interactions. And there's many features that are useful for real-world engineered applications. So we've taken inspiration from the birds, we've taken inspiration from ants as they create trails to our picnic table, from bees as they make decisions about their next nest site, and just fascinated by the ability from two cells to grow fully functioning human beings. Now, our focus has been the algorithm. It's been this question of, given a swarm behavior, how do you go back and design the right local interactions that give these beautiful complex outputs? And so once you figure it out, the nice thing is you can deploy these in reality. So here's a flock of 10 flying robots doing Reynolds-like flocking and performing these beautiful circular patterns in the sky. Here you see a swarm of 100 kilobots doing trail formation using really minimalistic random walks and local communication. And here you see decision making using a swarm of 400 robots, deciding between blue and red, blue being the decision that they're meant to converge to over time. And just like in embryogenesis, we can grow functional shapes. And here what you're seeing is a swarm of 300 kilobots, and they're sharing virtual morphogens that allows them to create Turing patterns, essentially spots, and these spots drive the growth of limb-like structures. And because the whole system is self-organized, you can cause damage to the structure, and it will regrow or it'll redeploy some of these resources. And you can split the swarm and it will self-heal over time, continuously updating the patterning that happens on those different robots. So that works when you have the bio-inspiration. When you don't have the bio-inspiration, in the focus of designing algorithms, we've also been looking at how we can use artificial evolution to automatically design controllers on board the robot so that they can, in just 15 minutes on these new teraflops, figure out how to push a Frisbee to one side of the arena. And taking into account all these different elements of both machine learning and bio-inspiration, we've been trying to shrink swarms down to the nanoscale. Really excited about the ability really of these tiny vehicles, because of their size, to leak out of vessels into tumor tissue. And those particles work in the 10 to the power 13. So a huge number to play with when you're thinking of swarm behaviors. And there we work with computational models to be able to see particles as they penetrate through virtual tumor tissues, but we also look at what would happen in little tumors on a chip under the microscope. And here you see blue and green particles penetrating through a tumor. And we're combining these different elements so that we can, as part of the EvoNano European project, essentially come up with a scenario. We need to treat a certain type of cancer with a certain drug, and use computational tools across scales plugged into machine learning so that we can output the right vehicle to treat that tumor, and then translate that to in vitro and in vivo experiments towards something that's more clinically facing. So we've been focusing in my team on the algorithms, on making these complex systems happen. And I think the next step is to get them out of the lab, is to profoundly embed them in our everyday lives and work. And so there we need to shift gears in terms of what we focus on. And what we need to do now is find a way to make it so that the user can understand a swarm, that they can control a swarm, and we need to figure out what users actually want with swarm technology. And so I'm going to go through some examples, because we've only just scratched the surface of things we're looking at in each one of these different areas. So first of all, understanding the swarm. Well, you saw before this teraflop swarm using artificial evolution to design controllers on board these robots to push a Frisbee to one side of the arena. And if we are going to use machine learning to automatically design swarm controllers, it's going to be essential that we're able to understand these behaviors. And so we've been focusing on using behavior trees as a controller for our robots. And what that means is that we can read these trees quite readily. We can build tools that, for example, allow us to color code what's happening to the robot depending on what behavior state it is in the tree or what its sensory information is. And so that allows us to understand, to peer in, at least to the behavior of the individuals within this swarm. We also need to make these swarms more expressive. And so here what you're seeing is a swarm of 200 kilobots. And essentially we're going to play you a performance. So this is just to show that we can convey something global by looking at a swarm. So here you have a sunset coming down. The user can, using its shadow, erase the sky, paint some pixels using a purple robot, copy paste some stars in the sky, paint a few clouds, and then reset the image, and you have the sun arise. And so this is just a demonstration of an expressive swarm, a swarm that conveys something to its viewer and has very easy modalities to interact with it. Everything here is done using local interaction. So there's no centralized system directing the overall performance. We're also actually thinking that robots might not need to have any algorithm. And so this is a very new project that we've just launched to design 100 robots that are meant to help in decision-making in human swarms. So essentially what these robots do as a first level is that they'll approach humans, they'll ask for an opinion, and then they'll share this opinion geographically by moving around the environment, which might favor mixing of people, but might also just allow opinions to travel a little further than the clusters in which things are being discussed. And then at the nanoscale, well, it's hard to understand what 10 to the power 13 things are doing. And so as a mind experiment, what we've been playing around with is there something zoomed out on a robot scale that would correspond proportionally to what you would see in a tiny slice of tumor. And after lots of basically constraint optimization, this is an image where essentially you have robots, kilobots here, pretending to be nanoparticles. You have projected cells, and this is at scale to what you'd see in a specific type of tumor if you were to just take a tiny, tiny bit and a tiny slice of it. So new ways to understand what swarms do, even if they're meant to operate at the nanoscale. So arguably, once we've understood these systems, we need to find a way of controlling them. And so here we have different things that we've started to explore. One is, if you have a supervisory agent looking at the swarm operation, maybe they want to be able to input new commands at the level of the swarm. For example, they might say go north or go south or disperse if they're trying to explore a building. And again, we use artificial evolution to optimize these supervisors, and these behavior trees that we use are human understandable. And so what that gives us is new strategies for swarms that are relatively small, actually, to explore an environment. You can see up here, you can always see what state of the behavior tree we're in. So you're going from northeast to southwest, and then you might disperse, and you can see that it's collecting targets along the way in the search of this environment. And the neat thing is, because we're using behavior trees, and so we've really thought about the building blocks that we want to use behaviorally for these systems, we can also either have an artificial system, as you saw before, or a human system who can jump in and control the swarm themselves. And so what you see on the right here is a map of the Bristol Robotics Laboratory. And admittedly an expert operator, since it's Elliot who designed the whole setup, but he's able to manually control this swarm as a supervisor throughout the BRL. And you can see these same types of behavioral building blocks that you saw earlier on. At the micro and nanoscale, we also need to control swarms. That has a host of applications in biomedical research and materials, and really just understanding life at those tiny scales. And so the things we'd want to control are nanoparticles. They might be bacteria, they might be cells, they might be unicellular organisms. And so we need new ways of controlling these. And to do that, we've designed the DOME, which stands for Dynamic Optical Microenvironment. The DOME allows us to project using a DMD projector on 800 pixels by 400 pixels approximately. So every pixel is 20 micron by 20 micron. And we have different magnifications so that we can essentially control image patterns, light, in tiny spaces, and we can use that to control micro agents. And what the exciting thing is, this whole setup is going to be released soon, open hardware, open source, and costs only £500 to produce. And to just give you some teasers of what we can do, here on the left, you see a water mite, essentially following a ring of light that we've projected. Here on the right, you see paramecium, and we're essentially tracking it with sunlight patterns and RGB. And here, just as a thought experiment, in honor to Conway, who sadly died of COVID, we have a game of life simulation where a Volvox here is essentially seeding the pixels that are then used with the game of life rules. And so the lights that you see are basically game of life rules that are initiated through those biological systems within our Petri dish. So we have this fluid closed loop control that allows us to control microagents. So then the last step is, what do users actually want? And so for that, what we've started doing is asking people. And so we focused on 3 use case scenarios in the past year and a half. One was warehouses, the second was bridge inspection, and the third was firefighting. And we wanted to ask people if swarms would be useful for them. And so to do that, we applied mutual shaping, which is a new methodology by Katie Winkle and her colleagues. And essentially, we asked them what their job is like. We tell them about swarms, and then we ask them what they think of swarms within their job. It's really that simple. And what we learned, and I'd encourage you to read the paper to get a lot more information, is first of all, they were quite positive. They could see the use of swarms within their industries, which is something we might not think is true, but they saw the potential. Some of the firefighters said, none of us are negative. We all would like it to happen. The next thing is, it's important to understand what these users care about. What is the art of their profession? We were designing an extinguishing robot swarm. We thought that they would want these robots to go in the difficult and dangerous environments and extinguish fires. But the firefighters didn't want that. They saw their core expertise as fighting fires. And so in their mind, it wasn't useful, and they didn't think robots could do it actually, to fight the fire. What they wanted were helpers to help them find information in that environment. And we had examples of this for the warehouses and for the bridge inspection, where their core expertise, the human expertise, was the thing that didn't need to be automated. And in fact, they really welcomed sort of shared autonomy between humans and the robots. And then the devil is in the detail, right? So how do you make these systems transparent and accountable, reliable and safe and easy to use? Because if it doesn't happen, then all those, yes, we use a swarm, they're all followed by if, and these ifs are if it's safe, if it's usable, blah, blah, blah. And so we need to get this right. And this process of mutual shaping was actually really useful. First of all, at the end of the discussion, people had more ideas of ways in which swarms could be used. They were more open-minded about its use and seemed to accept it better. And they went from thinking 2 or 3 robots was the optimal to maybe actually we could deploy 50 or 100 of these robots, which is the space we'd like to have people in. We've also reached out beyond the users to the general public. And so Danny designed this beautiful escape room called Swarm Escape that allows people to learn about swarm technology by breaking out of an escape room. So they essentially spend 30 minutes to an hour solving puzzles, and these puzzles teach them about swarm robotics. And then by the time they're finished, they have a better idea of how it could be used. And so as part of this exercise, we asked them where swarms would be useful. And you can see some of the ideas they had here, from construction to nuclear decommissioning to surgery to massages. So I think we're at a state where we need to change expectations around engineered systems and kind of get away from these magical flocks and bees that people see to things that are much closer to reality. And I think we just need to see examples. And it could be that the solution is not the algorithms, that the solution is the system as a whole in the way we implement it. So here's just an example of a cloakroom that we might want to deploy in the future. And this cloakroom has to be easy to set up. It's a service provider that provides cloakrooms for a bunch of events across the world. And the way they set it up is literally, you'd ship these robots to an area, you'd delimit a deposit area for items. Users would come to this deposit area, take an RFID tagged box, put their items in this box, and the nearest robot would pick it up and then put it somewhere. It doesn't need to be that organized in that storage environment. And then the user, when they're ready to collect it, they take their app and they say, okay, I'm ready to collect my glasses or whatever, my item in box with this specific RFID tag. And then they would send this information through the app, which would propagate through the swarm. And because there's enough robots, one of them would be within the vicinity of this RFID box, would quickly be able to retrieve it and go to the retrieval area. And so in this setup where you don't have a central control system, you don't have a map of where everything is, you're able to essentially put this out in reality much quicker than if you did have all this infrastructure requirement that you typically do need when you're deploying robot solutions. And I think people are ready to see such organic solutions in the engineering world. Actually, this makes it easier to interact with because a human could pick up a box and the system would still work. And actually, it's more human-like. If you were to organize a human cloakroom, right, you'd give something to the human and the human would put it somewhere in the storage room and then you'd go looking for it and retrieve it when you need that item. So it's somehow more intuitive. So this idea that swarms are difficult to interact with, are complex, that they're not fit for purpose yet. I think we need to break down those barriers with examples just that show how intuitive this could be and easy to set up. I think swarms are ready for many, many areas, and really, although I know there are challenges, I just wish and I hope we'll be able to make it happen. Thank you.